Welcome, those of you who are here. We'll wait just a second to allow everyone to join us. Looks like our numbers are growing, so we'll wait just another minute so everyone can be with us. Well, good afternoon and Happy New Year. I'm Harmony Langford, USBE's Early Literacy Coach of Coaches, and I'm excited to welcome you to this month's From the Science to the Classroom webinar with the incredible Dr. Nell Thompson. I will just shortly, I'll put a link in the handouts let's try that again. In a moment, I will link a PDF of our handout in the chat, and I will also be sending out a link to the recording of today's presentation as well as your certificate of attendance in a few days. If you have any questions for Nell, please type them in the Q&A, and if we have time at the end, she'll answer those for us. I am thrilled to introduce you to Dr. Danielle, or Nell Thompson, a coach, influencer, literacy leader, teacher of teachers, who is insatiably curious about all things that make people's lives better. She is an agent of positive change, helping leaders and educators rethink, unlearn, and level up their knowledge, leadership skills, instructional practices, and collective impact. From her rural roots in North Dakota to her time as a Peace Corps volunteer in a school for the deaf, Dr. Nell spent a decade working as a pre-K-12 speech-language pathologist and educator in Colorado, Montana, and Alaska public schools and Head Start. Realizing that she needed to do more for those who could not read, she spent the next decade studying and researching. She became one of the original National Letters trainers, focused on reading development and disorders for her doctorate, and obtained 2 leadership coaching certifications. Currently, Dr. Nell reaches and teaches leaders and educators as the president and founder of the Transformative Reading Teacher Group and the creative force for change behind the Big Sky Literacy Summit and Language is Everything. She is also the volunteer president of the Reading League Montana. Dr. Nell is a certified high-performance coach, a Maxwell certified leadership speaker and coach, founder of the Literacy Leadership Mentorship Series, and co-author of the Transformational Literacy Leader course. We are so grateful to have Dr. Nell here to share her expertise and inspiration with us today. Dr. Nell.
Gosh, I'm so thankful. I am so excited to be with you all. You know, not seeing your faces and sitting through an introduction thinking I should have picked the short form introduction. So I really am grateful. I am mostly here for you today. That's all this is about. This is about helping you up level and feel inspired about new knowledge. So welcome to the new year. I really have a presentation based on oral language today, but if anybody knows me out there, you probably know this is going to be a lot about leadership. It's going to be a lot about personal choice and leading ourselves to do something great in this world. And I think there are great things coming in education with the evolutions in science and what we can do for children. So I'm going to get busy and get my presentation up because I have a full presentation for you today, and I would love for you to know just that if you do have questions throughout, I don't mind being poked, saying, hey, could you talk a little bit more about this? But in the meantime, I'm going to rock and roll and just go through the content as if you are on the edge of your seat and can't wait to learn more, all right? So if that is, the question comes up, just pop it in the Q&A and Harmony will poke me and I will work on answering that for you. So please know that, and I can't wait to share this moment with you. So today, I titled this talk, Language is Everything, the Oral Language Roots of Academic and Life Success. And I did that because about exactly a year ago, I started meeting with some of our greatest language researchers, not just in the United States, but also from the UK. And I am very grateful to have many colleagues in the field who helped me understand the oral language foundations and help me understand understand what is best for children. And I want you to know that one moment during one of those talks, while I was feverishly taking notes, because it's a true story that ultimately we have to surround ourselves with people who know more than us. So I was just sitting there listening to these great minds, and I wanted to absorb everything I possibly could. And what happened in that moment was somebody said, well, language is really everything. And I'm like, language is everything. And then everybody on the call's like, language is everything, because it was going for languages, language and syntax, language and comprehension, language and knowledge. And then pretty soon, no, language is just everything. And so I'm going to try to convince you a little bit of that today as well. And we'll dive more into about how it could possibly be everything. So I start this talk also with this idea that one must not conceal any part of what one has recognized to be true. Albert Einstein. I'm a speech language pathologist. I'm going to be honest with you, everybody. I didn't really get language and oral language and the depth and breadth of how language is identity. It connects you to your people. It connects you to your mom, your dad, your culture. It's such an incredible facet of who we are. It's almost everything, right? I mean, it's how we communicate. It's how we receive information. And then just lately, in the last few years of my life, I do transformational coaching, oftentimes in the most at-risk schools across the country, where children have come from extremely marginalized backgrounds and inequitable school systems and lots of broken. And I work hard to figure out what the kernels of change are within complex systems. And I really believe it's not just the language between the adults in the room and how we communicate for change and how we communicate with those we serve, the educators we work with, the leaders we collaborate with. However it works out in your system, we have to really truly have language at every level. The students we serve have to have language to learn. The communities we serve we have to language communication between who our community is and what we are doing as educators and leaders. And all of a sudden I started to see that language, it really was everything, and how we communicated and how we showed up to educate all scholars really was based in language. And that truth has really hit me hard, so hard that that's why I'm here today. You know, as a speech language pathologist, I taught a lot of children, and I taught them based on their developmental language disorders. I know a lot about this stuff, but I hadn't really realized the kernel of truth, which I hope hits you today, that it's not just something that children in speech and language therapy need, or something that a multilingual learner gets because they're learning the English language, or they're learning Spanish, or they're learning Ukrainian, or many languages our scholars are learning. It's language because language deserves to be taught in its own right. So this is the gratitude I have to share. In this picture, some of you will know, because I don't just think, I know in Utah, you had a lot of exposure to letters. And my dear friends like Judy Dotson and Carol Tolman and Louisa Moats and Antonio Fierro and all these beautiful humans in my life have impacted the work you've done. And you'll see Louisa's right there in a picture with Carol. And the main bigger picture is an image with Louisa as well. These researchers have been cited over 175,000 times in the language research. So when we talk about the sciences of reading, this is about the sciences of language acquisition, language impacts on reading, journals of psychology, journals of social emotional well-being, across domains. These researchers in this photo, from the left to right, we have my colleague Donnie Hill, and then Charles Hume just named the Samuel T. Orton Award for the International Dyslexia Association for 2025. Elsa Cardenas-Hagen in the back row, Julie Washington in the front, Tim Odegaard behind Elsa, Tiffany Hogan, and then there's myself. Q Katz is behind me, Maggie Snowling, and Mariella Rios Diaz. She is creating helping support and build the Spanish version of Language Scream. So a lot of gratitude to these people, because these humans in this photo are the ones who help me truly deepen my understanding that language is everything. And they're the people that stand behind what we call that science of reading. They're the people doing that work to help us translate it into practice, right? And I'm here to help you see how that works, because I'm going to give you a practical application story. So a lot of gratitude to them. And you know what? Harmony hasn't even seen this slide because I just changed it 2 hours ago. This is a slide that I was like, I'm always rethinking, always up to tooling up and evolving my thinking. And Hugh Katz, as you saw in the previous photo, and many of you know, our dear colleague and friend who's leading the way and really trying to push boundaries around what knowledge we need to know in reading comprehension. He's a speech language pathologist by trade, but everybody take a moment and read this piece, if you would, from the brand new winter article in the American Federation of Teachers. It's also in the handout. I'm going to give you a minute to read it. All right. So obviously, I highlighted a line that says that this complex, multidimensional process called reading comprehension, it's dependent on well-developed language skills. And the argument in early development is that language is everything thought is that it underpins all the processes of comprehension. Like, we have to know something to do something, but we have to have the skill of language to know something and acquire something. Okay, so this is powerful. It's your vocabulary, it's your linguistic reasoning, it's your grammar skills, how you order words, it's how you build sentence structure, how you build discourse, how you communicate information, that pragmatic piece as well, but that's oral, this isn't written. But the most profound part that I think we have yet to evolve into is the acceptance that this is something that evolves over a lifetime. You really continuously build, even prepping for you today, even thinking about delivering this content for you today. I have new words coming out of my mouth and ways of thinking about things in my more evolved thought processes, because I'm reading, because I'm being challenged, because I'm learning new vocabulary. It's a lifetime process. And my inferencing ability, my connections of background knowledge to new knowledge is more efficient and effective because I have knowledge to build knowledge. Okay, so I'm using my language skills to do that. I think that's pretty profound. And I think as we've rolled out policy and practice across the United States, we have been very diligently focused on building those core components of the National Reading Panel. Most policies, including Utah, address those 5 domains, and comprehension is kept as a single domain. But what this new thought process is saying is that if language is this underpinning factor and comprehension is really multidimensional and complex, how could we possibly just teach it at 10:55 in the morning for 32 minutes? It would have to be something that would be across the day, integrated, interwoven, and truly at a complex level, because it's a complex process. And so I think ultimately this article will help you see that we're probably moving towards a new way of educating us as educators, educating our publishers in how they write curriculum, and really understanding how language is that underpinning factor. Because language is everything. And you'll see in your handout, I gave you a link to a 6-hour symposium hosted at the Big Sky Literacy Summit. It's free, you get to have it, because I want you to know more about what these researchers have said about language. And it's pretty heady, so don't be thinking you're going to get the next idea how you're going to teach oral language in your kindergarten room tomorrow. It's about helping push you to think, what is it about language that makes it so important? And we start at Birth to Three with Ann Kaiser from Vanderbilt. So link to that and you can grab onto some really powerful teachings. But one of the teachers is Charles Hume. And he said, in contrast to Hugh Katz and going on to that multidimensional component of what reading comprehension is and that it is based in language, Charles actually said language is this thing that's narrowly defined. It's a foundation of our ability to learn to decode the print and the ability to comprehend what we read. So language is impacting both, but he says broadly defined, it's the basis of all education and all aspects of our social lives and interactions with other people. I mean, that makes it pretty profound and pervasive. In fact, I would go on to say that language is a need. Language is something that every student that sits in front of you, if you're a leader, every teacher, every family, every community member, every intentional partner that you have has a need to communicate through language and to be heard and seen and have identity. That's part of what language is. It's powerful. And so I want you to prime your thinking. And I want you to, if you have the handout, just kind of think about it. If you had it printed out, you'd have circling, but it's okay. Let's just go through these. Think about it in your head and pop them in the chat box with Harmony if you can. I'm not moderating that, but here we go. Language screening is easily achieved through most screening protocols in use today. True or false? Are you truly screening oral language starting at 3 years of age in your screening protocol? True or false? Okay. Language is not important for word reading, but it is important for reading comprehension. I think through the Hugh Katz piece, we just kind of got, yeah, it's really important for reading comprehension. And then Charles Hume's quote, he actually went on to say it was important for both, right? So hopefully you know which answer that one is. Language is a skill worthy of instruction, not only in service to reading comprehension. So do you think we should teach language just to build these proficient, effective language networks that will then contribute to reading comprehension? Could we possibly do that? And should we? The last one, we can build an assessment and instruction system that identifies students for risk of language development differences, dyslexia, or both starting at 3.5 years of age. Do you think that's true or false? Do you think we can build an assessment or a screening protocol where we could find the risk for language development difficulties and dyslexia, word reading difficulties at 3.5? Do you think we could do that? All right, here we go. They were false, false, true, true. Okay. So by the end of this talk, I will hopefully have convinced you that you can walk away and you can go find a language screener and you can start doing this work for screening and intervening ASAP, because we don't just have good research. We don't just have one thing out there. We now have massive random control trials and really good effective tools that are different than our core curriculums on the market. They're actually evidence-based for effect. Powerful. And they're out there for you to put your hands on. So by the end of this, you're going to have those resources. They're already in your handout. So I want to outline the evidence for the importance of language, obviously oral language, and share the implementation story that I've gone through so that you can learn from what I've learned and the teachers and leaders I've worked with. We know that we can evolve this work, and we know the work and the future of the science of reading and its implementation in Utah policy, in all policies across the nation, it hinges upon our evolution of the work. Because sometimes we get to a data set and we're like, wait a second, we've been doing this work for 3 years and this third grade data set hasn't really changed a lot. What do we need to do? And I'm going to say, consider early oral language. Consider what this research is going to tell you in this talk. This is important because oral language skills are critical for academic success and well-being. We also have tools to give educators, that's you. And if you're the leader out there, you can equip educators with things that help them do this effectively and efficiently and with empowerment. I think that's really provocative and makes me really excited because I also think they're really, let's just say, it's a judicious decision financially. I think they're very affordable. So, measures of children's language skills and interventions are there to improve these skills. So, I'm going to give you an argument for the language foundations of reading. Here's the deal. In 2009, Hugh Katz, a great United States researcher down at Florida State and Florida Center for Reading Research, along with Fei, Zhang, and Tomlin, they went out and they looked at 604 kindergarten students. And the boxes are the highlighted part, but the big piece out of this one is that of the students that they screened, and of those who screened with reading difficulties, 70% of them went on to also screen with difficulties in language. So, of the 604 kindergartners screened for reading difficulties, 70% of them who had reading difficulties in that cohort also had language difficulties, okay? So, that's interesting, isn't it? Because if you're a kindergarten, first, second, third grade teacher out there, you all do things like Acadian, Stipple's 8th edition, Ames Web. You do CBM progress monitoring probes and universal screening probes. They're happening across the country. And you screen for risk. Well, what this is saying is those children that screen for risk, 70% of them would go on potentially to screen for risk in language. So the language foundation of reading and reading difficulties starts to become pretty clear in large data sets. And then across the pond in the United Kingdom, Charles Hume's team of Nash, Gooch, Levergue, and Snolling found that it also was underpinning the risk for dyslexia. So that early children, like at 5.5, your reading ability, the word reading, predicted your ability to comprehend. But what was interesting is that if a student had the presentation of dyslexia, that word reading difficulty at 5.5, that was predicted by language at 3.5. So oral language predicted the 5.5-year-old reading ability also, which then they went on to do massive longitudinal studies in familial risk, and that language seemed to underpin this entire risk indication system. And Maggie Snolling has a great talk on her site, OxEd, and I forgot to link it for you. I'll find it and give it to Harmony, because she actually gives a recap of the entire body of research since this date, which is 2015, is 10 years. And I think it's like 300 and some thousand people in the familial study. It's pretty profound. And it's profound that she herself has a family full of dyslexia and ADHD. And it really hits that these underpinning language markers actually help us understand more about dyslexia. And so it's not just a word reading problem. And I think that's also really important. So what I found in the history of the foundations of language foundations of reading, and I find it to be very interesting, is that oral language is this thing that happens from birth, and then we move into how do you map the oral system onto the printed system, and then we map that into how do we write it, how do we read it, and this is a lifelong journey. But when you look at a continuum of birth to death, the same exact continuum that language occurs, language is understood in utero, and fetuses can differentiate the nuances of language in utero. But what happens when we learn to read is it happens for a blip in our time. Once we learn to read, it's over. The brain doesn't go on to learn to read differently and more and make different networks about how you read words. No, it's actually a coded system. There are 26 letters and they're coded the same way every time. And sure, we might add an Arabic word or an Italian word, and then language might have a few more word and variations. However, language itself, like what that Hugh Katz quote in the beginning talks about, is its reading comprehension, the ability to read text, which is what ultimately our scholars get measured in, is a complex, multidimensional process that's underpinned by language skills. And it's how well your language is developed that builds your ability to build knowledge and experience and interacts with the world around you. I think it's profound to think that reading happens from 5 to 8, pretty much dominates, and language is something that happens your whole life, your whole life. Okay, so go on. The potential of language intervention. So now, the language foundations of reading are pretty clear that they have looked at hundreds of children, and of all the children and hundreds of thousands of children, they find that language seems to predict word reading. Language was present with children with reading difficulties. And so Maggie Snolling and Charles Hume went on to write a paper in 2010 that I love. The first one on the left here, it's about the virtuous cycle of theory to practice, and how I want this to be for us here today too, that there are a lot of informational pieces out there that you gain from training in science of reading courses, from being in this coaching series, from looking at models, and that's a lot. The simple view of reading was a theory that has now been proven over 100 times in research through structural equation models, through predictive models. So there's lots of statistical analysis that say this does hold true. This model holds true. So theory to practice. So that when the language system in this here, it says that we have to keep informing that system. And for me, back to my real life experiences in schools, I started to see that we would get data that I thought would come out better. And I'm like, I just don't feel like we're tapping into the entirety of this child. So the theory I had was that we have to do something differently. We have to evolve how we educate the child. We have to evolve how we tap into their language system before 5. Hello, there's a lot that goes on before 5. So the next thing was efficacy of language intervention in the early years. So the Snolling team, her doctoral team, she's speech language pathologist team, they really looked at the probability of early language intervention. And what they found is that, wow, it worked. We got statistical significance. Okay, so it actually worked. And if you go on to the third study over here, that one's a little bit more important for all of you out there leading this work and knowing that resources can get tight. They proved that language intervention didn't just work with teachers leading it, with TAs leading it. Okay, with thousands of people. So I was like, you know what? I work in reality, and we have to get resourceful with our resources. And I need to know that some of this stuff could work in reality, and we can't just transform science to practice immediately, but this you can. And it really is helpful to know that. So should we really keep things so simple? Actually, the Kane, Katz, Hogan, and Lomax work, it comes out of the this great campaign that the Language and Reading Research Consortium looked at across 6 universities, including UK and the United States. And they really found that language seemed to be predicting both the word reading linguistic skills, as well as the comprehension skills, which you'll see in this virtuous cycle, that oral language predicts reading, reading builds your oral language. And as Julie Washington went on to elaborate on this virtuous cycle, I love Julie's elaboration on this. Here it goes. Language makes reading better, and books reading make language better. So this is a nice, beautiful, virtuous cycle that we have to really attend to. And I say this for myself too. Remember, you can't really deny something once you've realized it's true. So when I walk into classrooms now, and I really monitor how much time is spent on different types of instruction, I really pay attention to how much language is happening in classrooms. Because if language is making reading better, are we actually teaching language and giving the thoughtful attention and intention to language instruction? So, of course, I'm helping you out with that today. So here we go. Now, I've set you up with the science behind this because, hey, this is a Science of Reading series. And, I'm confident you are enjoying that science because it's kind of fun and provocative, and it's something we can transfer immediately. So let's talk about how we're going to do that. So language and reading, my favorite quote in the history of all this work I've done, Al Lieberman out of the Haskins Labs at Yale said, reading is parasitic on language. And I don't know why I like that so much. I'm from a ranch, and, parasites were real in my life maybe. And so it is the knowledge component, but really, it just reminds me that something is living off of something else. And when you see the language brain, which I couldn't leave in here for needing to keep this brief, the language brain, the Stanislas Dehaene has a great video out there, and it shows how the language brain is existing. And then once you look at print, all of a sudden new networks start to fire on top of the language networks. It's a parasitic system. The reading system is parasitic on the language system. It doesn't exist without the language system. So language comes first, is so to say. And in most cases, language just happens naturally. It's part of your developmental experience, and it's beautiful. And when it's happening, it builds with relationships, and it gives us a sense of safety. It's part of our family culture. It's part of our people. It's the way we say things. And, I'm from North Dakota. And so, yeah, I could start talking like this if I really wanted to. But, when I get home, my family all kind of talks like that and gets in the pack up. So it's part of who you are. And when I go down to my school in Atlanta, they teach me things. I think it's amazing how the kids are like, Miss Nell, like get a grip. You're not saying that right, And so when we read things in text versus when we say things in oral language, and just really honoring home language and differences, and it's powerful. It's a need. It's a social connecting experience. But what is oral language to us as educators and leaders, and really wanting to understand how we can transform this kind of work in the classroom? It's not about just picking up a curriculum and doing it. I want you to know content knowledge so you can deliver on the promise of building language. So the language system is complicated, obviously, and it's built on phonology, semantics, grammar, pragmatics. And these are all words I'm sure you've all heard of before. And in that oral system, that phonology is that sound-based system, and it's the underpinning of the prosodic sound, the wave of the words, how I'm speaking right now versus if I spoke like this. But if I have prosodic sensitivity, that's part of phonology too, okay? But also right? Those are the individual phonemes of a word. But then we move into vocabulary, those meaningful units of words. Grammar is that order, and sentences, the meaning of the words in the sentences, semantics, and pragmatics, how we use things. Like, I'm not going to talk like this right now because I'm not yelling at you. That's not an appropriate way to talk to you, because that's not what's going on. So oral language for you in a classroom is pretty straightforward. We receive information, we express information. It's a cyclical thing that happens. And oftentimes when things don't get received, but we've expressed, we think we got behavior going on in our classroom, because we're talking and they're not receiving. And it's like, maybe you don't understand, or maybe you're just not hearing me. And in my case, I found children who are absolutely deaf in classrooms. No joke. I worked in Bush, Alaska for 6 years. I found crazy stuff in classrooms. So, I want you just to pay attention as educators that you can check these systems just without me coming in and being a big old specialist in this area, but you can do it, okay? So pay attention to how your students are listening and attending, how they're understanding the words and how you put the words together into sentences, and then how they're processing it for meaning and actually able to turn it around and communicate with you, which is the other side. So when they need to communicate with you, how are they choosing the words to share back with you? Do they plan their sentences in a way that makes sense? Are they making those sentences combined into narrative structure? And as we develop language from moving, say, if I was speaking Arabic, I had a young scholar from the Yemen. She spoke Arabic, and she's brilliant, just brilliant. And in the beginning, she would say single word utterances, and then it became 2-word, and then 3, and then a sentence, and then oh my gosh, 2 sentences. So you can see how that language develops, and you pay attention, that's actual language development. Now, we can measure these things with good language screeners, just like you can measure CVC word structure. Can I read whole words? Can I read sound by sound? You can measure this kind of development in language development screeners. And I want you to have that knowledge. I want you to know those things. You don't just have to do guesswork in your classroom, because some students truly haven't developed the listening process or the expression process. And some students really need us to attend to those things, because in that simple view of reading, word recognition and language comprehension are absolutely necessary to get to that very complex process of understanding, comprehending, called reading comprehension. So in this, we have to do both of these processes. And interestingly, the second bullet, Our research is indicating that the language skills are the foundation for both of these processes. That's why I'm really here to empower you to assess the skills that are critical for planning the education, the instruction, the intervention in language. So you're not just hoping you understand what these things are, how they receive and how they express, but that you actually have a diagnostic marker that helps you say, oh my goodness, the receptive language is really, it needs further development, and I can provide support for that. So this is what this looks like in statistical models. This comes out of the Language and Reading Research Consortium. Actually, Tiffany Hogan created this graphic. And what it's saying, and the numbers go from first to second to third. So the point here I'm making is connecting it back to this point here, the second bullet, is that language underpins both. So in this graphic, these numbers are saying vocabulary predicts word reading at a 0.68 in first grade. So if you have pretty good vocabulary in first grade, you're probably going to have better word reading, is what that's saying. You see that? And your vocabulary at a 0.83 pathway to language, well, that makes sense because your language comprehension is made up of a bunch of vocabulary words. So those have always been known factors. We know that vocabulary highly impacts comprehension. What we haven't known is the fact that vocabulary also is highly predictive of your word reading. Make sense? And all of you out there who've had true language development experience in your classroom, either from learning English for the first time because a different language is spoken first, or just a child who've really had low language exposure, when they have limited experience in language, it's really oftentimes when they're reading, they don't make the connection to the word that they're reading, and the word, it's as if it not doesn't exist. They just are parroting sounds. K, at, cat, 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 and you're like, cat, and then you show a picture and they're like, a cat. That actually is a true story for me with my scholar from the Yemen. She knew what a cat was, but she had no clue what cat was. No clue, because she didn't have an interoral vocabulary. So you see how that connection is happening there? And obviously your word reading highly impacts your reading comprehension in first grade. That's why it's a 0.81 over here. But look, it levels out by second and third grade. 50% of your understanding of the text really relies upon your ability to read the text. And obviously your language becomes more impacting on reading comprehension. And so that's what that model looks like. And here's another one. This is a simple view of reading and the four subtypes of readers. I love this graphic. I actually have redone this graphic with some new knowledge from Hoover, and but I didn't add it today because this one is good enough. The point of this one is look at the language good to poor dimension and the word reading good to poor. And you know what I always, Dr. Moats, when Louisa was strongly mentoring me in my younger years, it really stuck that most of our scholars are down here in this bottom left quadrant. They're a mixed subtype. They have both poor reading and both language, and that a lot of our other readers more often are dyslexic. That's that most highly prevalent specific learning disability reading category. And down here we have pretty good readers, but they have poor language. This one is less common, but this is more of a developmental language disability impairment. And then there's an old scatter plot from 2003 on that quadrant to show you how that looks in just a normal sample. And there it is. So most of our readers are in these three quadrants. Okay. Now there's one assessment tool out there now. I just got a data set this morning that I looked at, and the data set's laid out on the quadrant model. It's impressive. Because we need to know what type of reader our readers are and how much language is impacting their reading. But that means your assessment protocol has to be inclusive of language, and then the data has to be, the system has to have converge the data to say that when we have these linguistic markers and these linguistic markers, that's a mixed variety. This is a language but good reading. This is a poor word reading but good language, and gives us those mixed types. So we're moving down in the field to bring this science into actual practical tools for teachers, so you know what type of subtype your reader is. Why do I bring that to light? Because we're talking about oral language and its importance and how you can do something about it. This is all in your handout. I just wanted you to have it. I think what I take away the most as a speech language pathologist, and I still feel like Tiffany Hogan and I are beating this drum a lot, language difficulties are common. 7 to 10% of the students in your classrooms have them, for real. And you know that 10 to 20% have dyslexia, depending on where your cut points are. But your second most prevalent difficulty is a language impairment, but they're also the most unidentified kids in classrooms. So that is profound to me. I think, and I don't think I know, the research is very clear. A developmental language disability actually has more negatively impacting outcomes in a child's life than dyslexia does, because not understanding the world around you really impacts your ability to relate to the world. That's why in juvenile delinquent centers, you'll find there's a great study by Pamela Snow, 80% of the delinquents had language impairments, okay? So it's profound. So we have to really get serious about how are we identifying these students, and I'm really into early identification and understanding how we can support them. And one of the things that we can really stand on is that the science is behind us. We can improve their language skills if we find them early. They may have a developmental language disorder or just a difficulty, but one thing we know for sure, as Tiffany Hogan and I say, is that language impairment doesn't mean you're never going to get to the train station. It just means your train is going to arrive a little bit later if you get the right supports. It's very different than if you have a cognitive impairment. So this is something it's malleable, okay? You come with language skills that are very malleable. That's why your environment impacts it so much. That's why we as educators and leaders have to choose to do something about it. So that leads me to screening and assessing. So, I was working with Dr. Nadine Gabb a few years ago and doing some screening of children in Montana to be part of a normative sample for the early bird screener. And one of the things I really loved about thinking about the ultimate goal of early screening is that we want to find risk early so we can lower the rates of difficulties and disabilities and dyslexia identifications later. That's just a no-brainer, right? However, finding the right screeners to screen a child at 3.5 years, or 4 years of age. I don't know if y'all have tested birth to 3 range. I used to do birth to 3 and as a speech language pathologist. It's just a whole nother ball of wax. Our attention, our cognition, the way the world is prior to 3 is a little bit different after 3. And even the researchers at that cut point, the tools that you can use after 3 are a little bit different because there's more attention and more focus in a 3-year-old versus a 2.5-year-old. So what we do know now, though, is that we have screeners that go down to 3.5 years of age for language. This is so exciting. You should just be like, what? This is exciting. So one of the cool things is that if we're going to find, we know that finding this early matters. I want to just kind of bump you into the multifactorial model that Hugh Katz and Yakov Petcher talk a lot about, and they created some beautiful graphics. I've combined some work from Slomowitz and Yakov and Hugh, and here's the deal. The reason we want to understand a risk model, a risk resilience model, or a multifactorial model is that the scholars sitting in your classrooms, in your schools, in your state are experiencing reading at a variation of how they're learning it and who their parents are, what their environments are, what languages they speak. There are many factors that are affecting how they're learning to read. That's why no reading difficulty can be traced back to a singular cause. Yes, there are commonalities throughout, like we continue to see that phonology pops up, but it's not the singular cause. If you don't have phonology, oh, you're just dyslexic. That is not the singular cause. And that's why this multifactorial model and risk resilience model are really important. But what I'm trying to teach you here is that Language is a risk factor and language is a protection factor. Holy cow. So if you just have good language, it's a protection. It will be a promotive factor. Well, how could we help get better language skills just for children who've had low exposure, who've had limited experience? We can provide interventions, right? Because it's also on the risk side. So if we screen children and they show that they have a language risk, we have to do something. We can't just be like, hey, yeah, I got a risk here. When we do CBMs and we find phonemic awareness risk, or we find early alphabet knowledge risk, or we find early word reading risk, or we find early fluency risk, we're like, whoa, do something. I know what to do. I'm going to get a little small group going, and boom, and here we are going, well, yeah, but that's not working. Like I have some second graders in my Atlanta school that know 4 alphabet letters, and I know they are not cognitively impaired. And I know what's going on. There's a systemic breakdown. We have a few breakdowns on many levels. However, it's not just the fact that we can't learn the alphabet letters that's the problem. It's a language problem, okay? And so what was happening is that we also have a serious risk factor on our hand, is that we cannot continue without the assessment tools that help us find these risks, okay? And all of our assessment companies are trying to move in that direction. I promise you, I'm starting to see it, and I'm hoping I'm influencing that field in that way, which is why the Language is Everything Symposium exists. So we all start to learn more about it so we can just know better and do what Maya Angelou taught us. When you know more, you got to do more, right? You got to do better. And so this also helps us understand that when we start to think about our tiered models, MTSS is a powerful, a provocative system that needs to be maximized. And to maximize it, I'm suggesting you really consider, how are you screening your word reading difficulties? How are you screening your language difficulties? And do you have pathways or tools in your quiver that you can just like pull out and be like, bullseye, got that one? Because when you have an alphabet problem that's continuing to persist into second grade, I don't think we hit the bullseye in kindergarten, but we had only a few tools. And sometimes when you only have a few tools, you just do what you have instead of doing what could be done. So I want you to know that the tools that are on your handout, one of them is absolutely free. It's just going to cost you printing costs, and it will help you understand how to do this work. And I want you to know that you can lead yourself, and you can print those out, and you can learn how to do this. We want you to. Those of us who know that language needs to be taught, we have to start getting it right. We didn't get word reading right for a long time, which is why Utah passed a law a few years ago to let's get sure on how we teach word reading and actually teach reading. So the last part is my Science to Practice instructional story. I can't wait for you to kind of maximize your own story and your own potential. And with that, this story is getting published in a chapter in a book that's soon to come out. And I just want you to know that that's where a lot of this data is coming from and the story is coming from. And I put the disclaimer in because we ended up using the researchers, Maggie Snolling and Charles Hume, we ended up using the tool that they used in a massive random control trial of 7,000 some students within our project. So I'm not speaking on their behalf. I'm just telling you the true story of what we did. It'd be just like if you chose Dibbles or if you chose another curriculum, we would talk about it. So moving from science to practice, and another important piece for me is I have no problem letting people know a tool that actually is evidence for effect in thousands of children. So that's important because I'm not a publisher. And we have to start to understand what tools have evidence for effect out there and really work for children and all children. In fact, this story, we started to realize, I don't remember, Harmony, give me a thumbs up. Did you guys in Utah get a comprehensive literacy grant from the federal government? It's called the Circle Grant. No? Okay. So lots of states got them. They just re-got them. I think there's like 30 some odd states and it's millions of dollars. And this school in Montana, very much like many Utah schools, rural, has about, right now we have about 6% Spanish speaking students coming in speaking Spanish, predominantly white, just rural poverty, but also rural transitory stuff because we have a lot of Yellowstone National Park stuff and we're doing really good. You know, they got a grant. We're 4 years into it, and our data was looking really good. But we were like, our third grade data wasn't just popping, like I kind of said before. And actually, which is the opening story of the Hugh Katz article in the American Federation for Teachers. Like, we're doing everything the science is asking us to do, or what we thought to do by the component model, like phonology, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. We're doing it, and it just wasn't getting nailed, and we were like, well, we got to figure this out. So we had we got to the root cause, and we didn't have a lot of language. We didn't have a lot of understanding of oral language or teaching of oral language, a screening of oral language. So those conversations really led us to changing our practices. Okay. And here's where we started. I think, you know, if y'all had an older Dibbles, we kept the cheapest version as long as we could prior to it shifting over to the management dashboard. So you'll see, this is kindergarten, first time fluency, just looking at those early indication systems. So remember, phonology and vocabulary in that Hugh Katz study in 2009 were both part of the language composite that found that children who had reading difficulties, 70% of them also had language difficulties. And it wasn't just based in phonology. So look at our phonology scores. I mean, we're like, dude, 97% of our kids, like if you notice here, only 3 students are left in well below in middle of the year and they go on in phoneme segmentation. 0 students at the end of the year were in the well below. And yeah, this is a post-pandemic sample of 77. I think that's pretty amazing. And we were very, very happy because when you get solid segmentation skills, you'll also start to see it show up in correct letter sounds and then whole word reading. And so you'll see, I'm just kind of showing you some linguistic markers that say, well, we're teaching the sound to print system. We're teaching the sound to the alphabetic principle moving into, and I didn't put the phonics skills up. I could have had we have phonics inventories and those were looking really good. So, you know, but remember what I'm saying here is that we had this 4 years where we got to first grade and they would go, so this is kindergarten data, and the kids would come into first grade, and it's typical in just the change in how students are being expected to do different things. We would dip, but we would dip down to 47% proficiency. And we're like, what is going on? And reading composite in kindergarten would go up to 88% proficiency. Reading composite in first grade would drop to 47. So we're like, there's got to be a bigger picture behind this. Like, what is going on? And the teachers would work their pants off in first grade. And we could tell the students who had a lot of supports, they you know, the regression recoupments, we didn't test early. We tried to wait till late. We did everything right. And we're like, okay, we got to do something else. So we looked at what we were screening, and we knew that we were doing really well at screening the word recognition side of the simple view of reading. And I'm assuming you understand the simple view. I know you're in the Science of Reading coaching series. So that this component model saying, well, we have to have both, but neither one is sufficient on its own. But how interesting that we were very much assessing these component skills to then get a later oral reading fluency and accuracy score, right? So we're like, well, what if we started testing the language comprehension system? And we're not talking just vocabulary, because that's not a good enough proxy. It needs to be a composite, just like the word reading composite is. So the composite score is the most predictive of your reading skill overall. So we needed to understand what that meant. So we looked at many screeners, and we actually picked language screen because I happen to know the researchers. They were able to give us opportunity to test it, to see what we thought of it prior to doing purchases, and that was really helpful. And the compositive language screen gave us 4 subtests, okay? Receptive, expressive vocabulary, sentence repetition, and language listening comprehension, excuse me. And the researchers are pretty clear that they think that these are the four things that we need to screen to really get a good language composite. And what that looked like, and notice that only in third grade do I have a pink one for Maze, because it's looking at semantics and syntax, word order. That's what Maze is doing. And that happens in third grade. So we were looking for a screener that could get us down to PK. On the left side are the grade bands, okay? And so we needed something that could happen earlier. We needed to have risk much earlier. Remember that graphic that said, find the risk early, you'll decrease your reading problems later, and you'll raise your proficiencies. So we vetted a language tool. Our team really helped vet a plan. We trained our coaches, my colleague Craig Busher, he trained in the building with all teachers language strategy just for universal whole group. And that because we're going to screen, but we didn't actually have a curriculum right away. Well, we did. I'll show you what we had. But we were like, let's just go for it. Let's just get this kid screens, because we wanted to understand the difference between what the word reading screeners were doing versus what the language screeners were doing. So we started in the fall of 22, and then we determined who needed language interventions, and we began delivering what we could with what we had. So we had the Nuffield Early Language Intervention. That's Nellie, the bottom bullet. Nellie is Nuffield Early Language Intervention to a small population of students, just to get the lay of the land and see if we were going to be able to do it. This is language screen, just to give you perspective. Here's what it looks like. You show a child the castle, they get 24 pictures in expressive vocabulary, and they say, it's a castle, okay? The next one is listening comprehension. There's 16 questions. This is on a tablet. It's really easy to administer. We get really great reviews from the people who are administering. They think it's easy, straightforward. And they have to answer the question correctly. The gray box tells the administrator what they can accept and not accept. Receptive vocabulary is like, point to the watch, and then they touch it and it goes on. And the last one is sentence repetition. They have to say it exactly. We actually tried a version that was the British version, and it might be like, the teapot is hot. And the child would say, the teapot is hot, with the British accent, and it was most adorable. So I'll let you know that this school actually helped pilot the North American version of this language screener. So it's all North American version, and it's in Spanish now too. So when you're done, you get that top score is your composite. As I have told you, the composite is your most predictive of if you have a true language difficulty, just like a composite is true to a true reading difficulty. So this student here is telling us that their composite set is 73, and anything at a 90 or below is considered below average language skills. But if we're at a 73, this correlates at a 0.95, like almost 100% correlation to the clinical evaluation of language fundamentals. So if there's any speech language pathologist out there who gives a clinical evaluation of language fundamentals, the fact that this 10-minute protocol can correlate to a self at a 0.95, you're probably going to get a 73 on the self as you do a 73 on the language screen. So we found that to be true for children over time who consistently stayed at risk. They went on to be referred for developmental language disorders, and their scores were very consistent. So it was consistent with the research. But this is an awesome report. It's immediately available. So it really helped us understand how to help children. 26% of our 36 students demonstrated need. 72% of our 27 of our kindergartners presented need, and then 70% of the 21 demonstrated early literacy skill need. So we applied language for learning. I told y'all we did what we had. So if you have language for learning out there, it's a great evidence-based resource that actually stems out of work in the 60s, and it's really good. But we also did the two boxes on the bottom of the Nellie, the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, and then we went on to do whole class, and we also were doing structured, classic, good old, built our lesson structured literacy for phonics, because 70% of our students needed both of them. So we needed to nail it on both sides. Oh, I'm almost at the end, so I'm going to quickly go through this. What we found is that this is the protocol. The researchers found that 3 to 5 months of additional progress is gained in language skill compared to the control groups. It was great for ESL students as well. It was also that they had durable effects 2 years later. That's profound for the 20-week intervention. So we were very happy that a 20-week intervention had profound durable effects through 2 years. And it also was, the effect sizes are most impactful for children who have the lowest language scores, who have low socioeconomic status, who speak other languages, who many different things. They actually make the greatest gains. So they're benefiting the most from it. And here's our graphic. You can see that we had higher risk. That's all this means on the left. The big gray one, high risk, and we moved it to lower risk. We moved it to 11% in our preschool classroom, and we moved it down to 5% risk at the end of the year in our kindergarten classroom. That's meaningful because 7 to 10% of all children have language disability. So we think we found the true disability number, okay? So we did the interventions, guess what? In tier 1 and tier 2. And our speech language pathologist did not jump in and do the work, okay? So big celebrations, that data set alone tells you big celebrations. But what we really found is that 50% of our students also had behavioral, social, emotional concerns, and that we found that the actual instruction of the language resource changed our outcomes, and that was just a proxy effect. It was really powerful. Obviously, I said the 70% one before, but this research came out while we were working in 22, that 1,173 children had increased social emotional outcomes by being in a language intervention, and they did not teach a specific social emotional program. So we found the same thing. Year 2, we did whole class and intervention, and we screened children just like we had done the year before, but now we increased our interventions, and it was teacher's choice. This is the most profound slide. It's so important for all of you. Teachers, whole class, core instruction. A core instruction first grade teacher with 19 students in her class. This is an entire bell curve shift to the right. It moved 8.1 standard deviations to the right, average increased score for all children. So just all children got good language instruction by their core teacher for 20 to 25 minutes, and now she's linking it to their writing. And we saw a standard score change in 8.1. And the only child who didn't make change because she came and she only had it for 3 weeks. So we're now studying the data of these children as they are in the second grade to see if they're statistically different. Remember the durable effects? We want to see if they're different than the children who didn't get the intervention. So we're continuing the work. We have all of our teachers now in the classrooms from pre-K through 2 invested in the project. Our special services director and SLP are leading the work. What's most important is that this is the data flow chart that they created. I'm so great. I love leadership is what makes this work. Great leaders bring this to life. I inspire and empower, but I am so proud of this team in Livingston, Montana, because they did this work. They created this flow chart. They led it. They had the hard conversations. And now when children come through the screening process and the data's there, they're basing their decisions on this flow chart for language. We have lots of them around word reading, but this one's for language. And so that is my talk, and big key takeaways are in your handout. But the big one is we can evolve this. We can screen and we can intervene and we can really make a difference. And I just think the world will be a better place when we really start addressing that relationship connection that language helps us have. And as human beings, we'll never believe something until we discover it for ourselves. So I hope you go discover it for yourselves. And I hope you have as much fun as I have had in doing this. And I've given you all these resources. I've made the hyperlinks active. So hopefully, if they're not, you can go look them up. But all the references are there. And you have my email. So if you want to reach out to me, please do. I can connect you with any one of the people that I have helped me get this far if I can't help you answer the questions. And I thank you for your time today. I'm so grateful you're here. And I know we're over probably, but I will take questions if you want me, if you have any for me to answer.
We did have one question, and just it's how can a teacher best intervene with a student who has a language impairment in their classroom?
So the beginning process, first and foremost, is to just tune into what it means to have a developmental language difference or disability. Have you looked at DLD and Me? It's a website. Rattle is another one. It's out of the UK. There's lots of great things to tune into as a teacher, and you can quickly go see what it's like for the student and what you can maybe do. But another thing I would recommend is go look up the Let's Know curriculum in the handout. It is built for pre-K through third grade, and it's free to access. And I find that just reading the lessons, they literally are structured lessons for language. You can start to see, oh my gosh, this is how I could teach more language in my classroom. And it will help you have a structured awareness of what that could look like.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. And everything you've shared has been so fantastic and inspiring in helping us to understand the critical role of oral language development in literacy development and the actions that we can take in this area to improve reading outcomes for all Utah students. And your enthusiasm is just inspiring. I just want to go out and preach oral language now. This
Well,
has been a
excellent.
wonderful hour.
As you should, because I
Thank
really
you.
think it's going to make a big difference for us and
I
help
I
us
think
in
you're
our
right.
schools. So,
I think we've
again,
all
let me know if you
experienced
have
that. Why
questions.
are the scores not moving
Hmm.
when we're doing all the things? So
Yep,
thanks. Thank
yep,
you.
yep.
Um, Participants, we hope you'll be sure to join us for next month's webinar on February 10th at 4 o'clock, when Dr. Elsa Cardenas-Hagan will help us to continue to build our knowledge of what every educator needs to know about structured literacy in relation to our multiple language learners. And if you're here today, you're already registered, so please be sure to join us. Again, I'll be sending out attendance certificates as well as a recording of Dr. Nell's presentation within the next day or two. I hope you enjoy your evening, and Dr. Nell, thank you again so much for your time and your enthusiasm. We sure appreciate it.
You're welcome and enjoy, my dear friend Elsa. It's going to be fantastic.
Thank you so
Okay, bye
much.
everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.